On the crisp autumn afternoon of October 1st, 1919, America turned its gaze to Cincinnati's Redland Field. The World Series was set to begin, pitting the powerhouse Chicago White Sox, a team some considered among the greatest ever assembled, against the underdog Cincinnati Reds. The White Sox were such overwhelming favorites that finding anyone willing to bet against them was a fool's errand. On the mound for Chicago stood Eddie Cicotte, the team's ace, a brilliant pitcher coming off a spectacular season. His first pitch of the series was a clean strike. The crowd roared. Everything felt right. His second pitch, however, was different. It sailed inside and struck Reds leadoff hitter Maury Rath squarely in the back. To the tens of thousands watching, it was just an erratic pitch, a shaky start for the veteran. But for a handful of men scattered across the country, the gamblers who had quietly placed $10,000 in cash under Cicotte's hotel room pillow, it was the unmistakable signal. The fix was on. In that single deliberate act of contrived incompetence, the sacred trust between player and fan was broken. It was the moment a simple game of baseball became something much darker, a conspiracy, a swindle, and what would forever be known as baseball's original sin. To understand how a team so dominant could agree to sell its soul, one must first understand the world they inhabited. The popular narrative, immortalized in books and films, paints a simple picture of victimhood. It casts White Sox owner Charles Comiskey as a notorious miser whose penny-pinching ways drove his underpaid superstars to desperation. Recent historical analysis of salary data from the era reveals a far more complex reality. The 1919 Chicago White Sox weren't a band of beleaguered paupers working for pennies. They had the third highest team payroll in the American League, and when accounting for bonuses, likely the highest in all of baseball. Their payroll was substantially larger than that of their World Series opponents. The stars were earning salaries many times that of the average American worker in a time when there were few opportunities to be a professional sportsman. The real source of player resentment wasn't their paychecks, but their powerlessness. Baseball's draconian reserve clause effectively bound a player to one team for their entire career, stripping them of any bargaining power. For example, Ty Cobb couldn't sign with another club unless Detroit traded or released him. He simply had zero agency in the matter. Simply put, baseball players were highly paid assets, but assets nonetheless, unable to test their value on an open market. This systemic lack of agency fostered a deep-seated cynicism toward owners like Comiskey, who became symbols of this absolute control. This frustration simmered in a culture where the lines between baseball and betting were almost non-existent. Fans openly placed bets in the grandstands on everything from the final score to what the result of the next pitch would be. Players themselves frequently bet on games, and their casual association with gamblers blurred ethical boundaries, and the earliest match-fixing scandals went back decades. Contrary to the myth of predatory gamblers luring innocent players into a trap, the plot to throw the 1919 World Series was born from within the White Sox clubhouse. The consensus among historians is that the players themselves were the instigators. The undisputed ringleader was first baseman Chick Gandil, a tough, hard-nosed player with deep connections to the gambling underworld. Alongside ace pitcher Eddie Cicotte, who was reportedly worried about his financial future and his aging arm, Gandil hatched the scheme. He approached his underworld contacts with a stunning proposal. The World Series was for sale. Gandil and Cicotte became the architects, recruiting teammates from their faction within the divided locker room. They brought in key players like pitcher Lefty Williams and shortstop Charles Risberg. Oscar Felsch and third baseman Buck Weaver were present at the meetings, though Weaver would insist he wanted no part of the final deal. Others would find other ways to enter into the conspiracy. For instance, utility infielder Fred McMullen wasn't even invited. In a move out of Crusader Kings, he forced his way into the plot after overhearing the conspirators and threatening to expose them if he wasn't given a cut. The involvement of the team's biggest star is one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this scandal. The extent of Shoeless Joe Jackson's part in the plot remains the most hotly debated piece of the puzzle to this day. He admitted to taking money to fix the game, but then double-crossed the gamblers and went out and tried his best. His performance during the World Series was absolutely stellar, leading many modern scholars to believe he was running a grift on the scammers. Basically, he put on a world-class game of baseball over the course of 8 games, despite accepting a fat stack of bills to be in on the fix. The conspiracy was messy from the start, involving at least 2 separate and competing syndicates of gamblers. Gandel's primary contact was Boston bookie Joseph Sullivan. Simultaneously, a former ballplayer named Bill Burns and his partner Billy Maharg were organizing their own financing. Both groups quickly realized they needed a massive bankroll to pay the players their promised $100,000 fee. That led them all to one man, Arnold Rothstein, the most powerful and notorious underworld financier in New York. Rothstein was a criminal mastermind, the inspiration for fictional characters like Meyer Wolfsheim in The Great Gatsby. He initially turned down the offer but was eventually persuaded, likely seeing an opportunity for a foolproof score. Rothstein, however, was far too clever to deal with the players directly. He operated through layers of insulation, using associates as intermediaries. This calculated distance ensured that while he would profit immensely from the fix, his name would never be directly tied to the dirty work. When the scheme eventually imploded, this structure allowed Rothstein to walk away untouched, while the players took the fall. The exact level of involvement of this underworld kingpin remains a matter of debate, given how adept he was at covering his tracks, and how tightly his lips were sealed. Notably, less than a decade later, while Arnold Rothstein was laying on his deathbed after being attacked, he famously told the cops his dad shot him. For clarity's sake, for those unfamiliar with the story, his dad definitely didn't do it. The fix began to unravel almost as soon as it started. After Eddie Saccott's signal in Game 1, he proceeded to pitch abysmally. In Game 2, Lefty Williams took the mound and issued a series of suspicious walks in the 4th inning, leading to a 4-2 Reds victory. The players had delivered 2 losses as promised, but when it came time to collect, the gamblers reneged. Of the $40,000 they were owed, they received only a single payment of $10,000, which Gandel split among the conspirators. The trust between the cheaters was immediately broken. The plan descended into chaos. In Game 3, in a surprise move, a rookie pitcher who wasn't in on the fix took the mound for Chicago, leading to a White Sox victory. The gamblers were furious, and the players were divided. The fix was back on for Games 4 and 5 with more suspicious plays, and the Reds won both games, taking a commanding 4-1 lead in the best-of-9 series. By this point, the players were enraged. They had been repeatedly shorted on their payments and felt they were being double-crossed. In a stunning turn, they decided to double-cross the gamblers back. Playing with renewed fire, and also playing with fire, the White Sox won Games 6 and 7, suddenly pulling the series to a tense 4-3. The gamblers, who had millions riding on a Cincinnati victory, were panicked. Before the pivotal Game 8, they reasserted their control. According to some theories, the mob sent out some heavies not to threaten the ball players, but their wives. Whatever the truth of what happened, the Reds crushed the White Sox in Game 8, and the Cincinnati Reds won their tainted championship. For nearly a year, the scandal remained an open secret, a swirl of rumors that dogged the White Sox throughout the 1920 season. Sports writers refused to let the story go, relentlessly questioning the legitimacy of the 1919 series due to the highly irregular performances of the White Sox players. Their persistence finally forced the hand of the authorities, and in September 1920, a Cook County grand jury was convened to investigate gambling in baseball. The conspiracy quickly unraveled with a number of the men turning on each other. Thankfully, this occurred in Chicago in the early part of the 20th century, so there would be no corruption whatsoever to follow. The subsequent trial in the summer of 1921 was, by all accounts, as conventional as the 1919 World Series itself. The prosecution's most crucial evidence, the signed confessions of 3 of the players, had mysteriously vanished from the courthouse files. Years later, they would reportedly reappear in the possession of Comiskey's personal lawyer. What a strange coincidence, right? Truly baffling. Without the confessions and with key witnesses recanting, the state's case fell apart. The jury, seemingly enamored with the celebrity athletes before them, took less than 3 hours to acquit all defendants on all charges on August 2nd, 1921. The players were carried from the courtroom on the shoulders of jubilant fans. Their celebration lasted less than 24 hours. The verdict had terrified baseball's owners, who saw the public's faith in their product evaporating. To save the game, they had already made a radical move, hiring federal judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis as baseball's first ever commissioner and granting him absolute power. The day after the acquittal, Landis issued a statement that would change American sports forever. He declared that the jury's verdict was irrelevant, and he invoked his absolute authority to protect the integrity of the game. The 8 men involved in the Black Sox scandal were banned for life, though in a bizarre turn of events, in 2025 the decision was reversed. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who would be almost 150 years old now, is once again eligible to play ball. You're living in a small New England town in the late 1880s, and word spreads quickly that the leatherman is due to arrive today, right on schedule. But despite this sinister name, you and the other townsfolk step out to watch as a strange figure trudges into view. He's a bearded man swathed head to toe in a patchwork suit of leather, perhaps 50 pounds of it, scuffed and weather-beaten from endless travel. He moves with a steady determination, indifferent to the rain and mud, a well-worn knapsack on his back, and a stout walking stick in hand. It may sound like complete fiction, but this is no myth, but rather the multiple mysteries of a figure beloved by New England locals in the 19th century. The man known only as the Leatherman was a mysterious vagabond who roamed the roads of western Connecticut and eastern New York in the mid-19th century. He first appeared sometime around the late 1850s and spent over 30 years trekking through the region until his death in 1889, and his legend grew over the years. His nickname came from his unusual attire. He had a handmade outfit completely fashioned from leather boots, belts, and scraps. By all accounts, he was a quiet, harmless wanderer who rarely spoke more than a grunt or a polite thank you. Yet despite how odd he was, he became a welcomed sight in many communities, despite his rough appearance, and he was treated with great respect. In fact, he was so respected that towns along his route would eventually pass laws to protect him and stop anyone from interfering with him. Of the Leatherman's personal life, his real name, origins, and motives, little is known for certain. He never explained himself, and the few times people tried to ask, he would abruptly end the conversation or simply wander off. Locals observed that he spoke in broken English but was fluent in French, leading to speculation he was of French or French-Canadian origin. He also steadfastly refused to eat meat on Fridays, strongly hinting at a Roman Catholic background, which I'll be discussing more in a bit, since I have a theory about this. Notably, when he perished, he was found with a French-language prayer book, which unfortunately doesn't appear to have been preserved. While this confirmed that he was indeed a French speaker, the prayer book could have given clues as to whether he was French-Canadian or from France itself. What made the leatherman truly extraordinary was the regularity of his travels. He walked an enormous circular route of roughly 365 miles, visiting a loop of about 41 towns in Connecticut and New York in sequence. Incredibly, he would complete the entire circuit in about 34 days, almost like clockwork, then start all over again. By the late 1870s, locals had long noticed this pattern, and one newspaper even took to publishing his schedule for anyone who wanted to come see and greet him. He typically traveled on foot and alone, covering an average of around 10 to 11 miles a day to keep on schedule. Wherever he went, the leatherman had favorite stopping points, and he would stop at particular farmhouses where he would receive food free of charge. However, he wouldn't stay overnight, even when he was offered a warm place to stay, and the reasons for this are unknown. And it's not as though people weren't offering, especially by the 1880s, when he had become a fixture of the communities he was traveling through. Unlike other travelers of the era who sought out barns or shelters, the leatherman almost always slept outdoors. He typically slept in caves, rock shelters, or hollowed-out spaces along his route. These spots became known locally as Leatherman's Caves, and many can still be found today bearing that name. During brutal winter weather, he would build fires at a cave entrance to warm the interior, and he somehow survived infamous storms of the period. Despite years of sleeping rough through New England winters, by the end of his life he hadn't lost a single finger or toe to frostbite, a testament to his survival skills. This has also been cited as evidence that the leatherman wasn't someone who didn't have his wits about him. Had he not been extremely proficient in his ability to survive, he wouldn't have made it under these conditions. Although the leatherman lived apart from society, he was no hermit. In fact, many communities along his route developed an affectionate relationship with the wandering leather-clad man. He never begged outright, but residents knew he relied on their hospitality for sustenance. As his expected day approached, kind families would bake extra bread or pies and set aside coffee for the leatherman's customary visit. He typically took his meals on the porch or doorstep, rarely coming inside. If invited indoors, he preferred to sit near the door and would often eat quickly and depart, as if eager to stay on schedule. Despite his grizzled, dirty appearance, people were not afraid of him, and he was unfailingly courteous in his own way and seemed content with what little he had. Legally, the late 19th century was not a friendly time for vagrants. Connecticut even passed a strict law in 1879 that allowed police to arrest and jail any homeless wanderers. Remarkably, the leatherman was held in such regard that at least 10 Connecticut towns passed local ordinances specifically exempting him from the law. He was never arrested, even though officially he was committing a crime by wandering his circuit. He was, however, taken into custody by the authorities in 1888, but this wasn't for the reason you might think. The leatherman's health was very visibly declining, and the people and the authorities became worried that there was something wrong with him. He was examined at a hospital in Hartford and found to be sane, but highly eccentric, and he refused any further treatment for ongoing medical issues, which I'll discuss shortly. From almost the moment he first appeared, people wondered, who is this strange man, and why is he doing this? The leatherman himself never gave an answer, so speculation ran wild. In 1884, a Connecticut newspaper attempted to solve the mystery by publishing what it claimed was the leatherman's real-life story, and the tale was sensational. One popular explanation said the leatherman was really Jules Bourglet from France. According to this tale, he was a man who fell in love with a leather merchant's daughter, lost his fortune in a failed leather business, and then took to wandering in leather as penance. This romantic tale neatly answered every question people had, and newspapers eagerly reprinted it. But there was a catch. Not a word of it was true. In reality, the leatherman never divulged such a story to anyone. The reporter had simply invented it when he failed to get an interview, and the newspaper later printed a retraction once the hoax came to light. Despite the debunking of the tale, no further progress was made in finding out who he was, and the leatherman's real identity remains a mystery to this day. Most researchers believe that he was most likely of French-Canadian background and may have been from either Quebec or New Brunswick in Canada or from Maine. That said, there does remain the very real possibility that he was actually from France, or that he was born in America to a French, but not French-Canadian family. In the winter of 1889, after more than 30 years on the road, the leatherman finally succumbed to illness. On March 24, 1889, he was found deceased in one of his caves in the town of Mount Pleasant, New York, not far from Ossining. The cause was determined to be mouth cancer, likely a result of his years of tobacco use. Locals who had looked out for him in life ensured he had a proper burial, and he was laid to rest in Ossining's Sparta Cemetery, although no one knew his real name. For a time his grave was mistakenly marked Jules Bourglet, reflecting the popular legend, but in truth he remained as nameless in death as he had in life. Also, there is something so fittingly poetic about a man who chose to adopt a Spartan lifestyle for his entire known life being buried in Sparta Cemetery. If this was a work of fiction, viewers would say, "Nah, that's going a bit too far." In 2011, concerns about the old grave's proximity to a roadway led to an exhumation of the leatherman's remains, and historians hope to finally identify him via DNA. To their surprise, the coffin held only a few nails and scraps of wood, and his body had long since disintegrated and been claimed back by the earth. He was reburied in a new spot in the cemetery, under a fresh headstone that simply reads, "The Leather Man," acknowledging that this mystery will likely never be solved. Personally, I think the Leatherman's mysterious devotion to his wandering life takes on deeper resonance when viewed through the lens of Roman Catholic tradition. He was known to avoid meat on Fridays, a custom deeply rooted in Catholic practice, and he kept with him a French prayer book that suggests a faith carried quietly but consistently. In Catholic history, pilgrimage has long served as an outward expression of inner penance, a way for the devout to atone for sins or seek spiritual renewal. These journeys are marked by hardship and repetition, as well as the renunciation of worldly comforts. For instance, for high nobles to atone in medieval times, they would wear the clothing of beggars and walk barefooted to a holy site and seek forgiveness for whatever they did. Seen this way, his 365-mile loop through Connecticut and New York wasn't just the path of a drifter. It might have been his own private pilgrimage to atone for some unknown act. Each step could have carried the weight of contrition, his leather garb both armor against the elements, and perhaps a symbolic reminder of the burden he chose to bear. His refusal of comfort, his preference for sleeping in caves, and his commitment to an almost monastic silence resonate with traditions of asceticism. Whether or not he consciously framed it in these terms, we have strong evidence he came from this religious tradition, and the leatherman's life mirrored the age-old image of the penitent pilgrim. In this view, he was a lone traveler walking endlessly, caught between the earthly and the spiritual, seeking not an earthly destination, but some quiet reconciliation between himself and God. In the end, why the leatherman felt the need to wander and who he was remain a genuine, unsolved historical mystery. On the night of June 20th, 1947, Bugsy Siegel was relaxing, without an apparent care in the world. Inside a lavish Beverly Hills mansion at 810 North Linden Drive, he sat on a floral-covered sofa next to his associate, Alan Smiley. The 41-year-old gangster, known for his violent temper but also his considerable charm, seemed to be in good spirits, casually reading the Los Angeles Times under the glow of a table lamp. The living room drapes were wide open to the warm California night, an oversight for a man with a long list of enemies. Outside, hidden in the darkness and less than 14 feet away, a marksman took aim. The hitman rested the barrel of an M1 carbine on the exterior of the window and pointed towards his illuminated target. Then, suddenly and without warning, shortly before 11, the quiet was shattered by a volley of 9 shots, tearing through the glass. 4 of the 9 shots found their mark with brutal precision. 2 bullets ripped into Siegel's torso. 2 more struck his head, and for Bugsy, the end was almost certainly instantaneous. Alan Smiley, in a miraculous stroke of luck, dove to the floor as the shooting started and escaped with only a bullet hole tearing through the sleeve of his jacket. To understand who pulled the trigger, and more importantly, who gave the order, one must first understand the man whose violent life came to an even more violent end. Bugsy was born into a world he was determined to escape by any means necessary. The son of poor Jewish immigrants from the Galicia region of Austria-Hungary, he was born in Brooklyn in 1906 and grew up surrounded by the poverty of the Lower East Side. He rejected the humble life of meager wages his parents endured and, from a young age, sought a faster path to wealth and status through crime. He started by running a brutal protection racket, targeting pushcart peddlers from his community who operated in a legal gray zone. If a vendor refused to pay for his protection, someone would just happen to douse their cart in kerosene and set it ablaze, a terrifyingly effective business model. It was on these tough streets that Siegel forged the most important alliance of his life. He befriended Meyer Lansky, another ambitious teenager who possessed the intellect and strategic mind that perfectly complemented Siegel's sheer aggression and fearlessness. Together, they formed the Bugs and Meyer mob, a gang that quickly became a feared force in New York's underworld. With the advent of Prohibition, they moved into the lucrative business of bootlegging, hijacking liquor shipments from rival outfits, and serving as hitmen for various crime families. Siegel's personality was a study in contradictions. He was strikingly handsome, impeccably dressed, and charismatic. He was obsessed with the concept of class, believing it was the only thing that mattered in life. He cultivated an image of sophistication, buying an apartment in the Waldorf Astoria, and routinely visiting high-end nightclubs where he would flex his success. He was vain, using face creams and washes every morning and night to maintain his youthful looks in what I can only assume was the style of Patrick Bateman. In the mid-1930s, after establishing himself as a hitman in NYC, Siegel was sent to California to expand underworld operations on the West Coast. He quickly consolidated control over gambling, ladies of negotiable affection, and a variety of substances. But he also found a new stage for his unique persona: Hollywood. He became a fixture in the celebrity social scene, befriending A-list stars like Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, and Frank Sinatra. This dual identity as a charming socialite and a brutal predator was more than just a lifestyle. It was a highly effective professional strategy. His glamorous Hollywood connections provided a perfect cover for his criminal activities. This allowed him to operate in plain sight as one of the nation's first front-page celebrity gangsters, who was known to the public primarily for his social connections and charm. He leveraged his friendships for direct financial gain, borrowing $500,000 from movie stars and movie executives. His gentlemanly persona made these wealthy and powerful people believe he would make good on these loans, but he never really intended to repay them. However, Siegel's ultimate ambition lay east of Hollywood, in what was then the dusty desert town of Las Vegas. The vision for a new kind of luxury resort in Las Vegas, however, wasn't originally his. It belonged to Billy Wilkerson, the influential publisher of The Hollywood Reporter and a successful developer of popular nightclubs. Wilkerson envisioned a sophisticated European-style hotel and casino that would stand in stark contrast to the rustic establishments that then existed on the Strip. But Wilkerson, a heavy gambler himself, quickly ran out of funds during construction. Seeing an opportunity, Siegel, backed by millions of dollars from Lansky and other mob interests, muscled his way into the project, eventually forcing Wilkerson out and taking complete control. With the project in his hands, Siegel's obsession with class and his lack of business acumen proved a disastrous combination. Or should I say, it appeared to be disastrous at the time, since, as you'll see, many of the steps he took to make the Flamingo unique would be what made Las Vegas what it was and is. The hotel's budget, initially estimated at around $1.5 million, spiraled out of control to a staggering $6 million. Siegel demanded unprecedented luxuries, many of which were unheard of in the desert at the time. Each apparently misspent dollar would be yet another woodpecker of mistrust, brutally pecking away at the bonds between Bugsy and his financial backers. He insisted on full air conditioning, lush gardens with imported palm trees, and most extravagantly, private sewer lines for each of the hotel's 105 rooms. Interestingly, Bugsy ended up getting fleeced repeatedly and consistently by contractors, who realized that he had a lot of money and no business sense. He would nickname this hotel and casino resort in the desert the Flamingo, supposedly as a nod to his girlfriend, who had notably long legs. Back east, his mob investors were furious, and they grew deeply suspicious that the massive cost overruns were not just due to mismanagement. They believed that he may be skimming millions of dollars from the mob to fund his fancy Burt Reynolds tier lifestyle. The situation came to a head in late December 1946 at the National Hotel in Cuba, where Lucky Luciano, now exiled from America, convened a major summit of crime bosses. One of the most pressing items on the agenda was what to do about Bugsy Siegel and his money pit in the desert. Many of the bosses argued that Siegel had shown blatant disrespect and had to be eliminated. The meeting reached a dramatic climax when Meyer Lansky stood up to defend his childhood friend. According to some who later talked about what happened at this legendary meeting, Lansky's advocacy ended up saving Bugsy's hide for the time being. His life hinged on whether the Flamingo would be the massive money printer it was supposed to be. The opening, scheduled for the day after Christmas 1946, was a complete catastrophe. A rare winter storm grounded the private planes Siegel had chartered to fly in his Hollywood friends. While some celebrities made it, the star power was severely diminished. Worse, the hotel portion of the resort wasn't even finished, so there were no rooms for the gamblers who did show up. The high rollers who won big at the tables simply took their cash and went to stay and spend at the neighboring hotels and casinos. Within its first week, the Flamingo's casino lost a reported $300,000. Humiliated and hemorrhaging money, Siegel was forced to shut the doors within weeks of the opening while the casino restructured. However, he would soon be cut down by that bullet, and he would never be able to fully oversee the next steps in the Flamingo's life cycle. The most widely accepted explanation for Siegel's slaying is that it was a cold, calculated business decision made by mob interests. From the mob's perspective, Siegel was a liability. He had mismanaged a massive $6 million investment, shown blatant disrespect to his powerful backers, and was widely suspected of stealing from them. In the unforgiving world of organized crime, these were capital offenses. His execution was a message to everyone in their sphere of influence. No one, no matter how famous or feared, was above the bottom line. The most compelling evidence supporting this theory is the swift and seamless takeover of the Flamingo. Just minutes after the shots were fired in Beverly Hills, three of Lansky's top associates, Mo Sedway, Gus Greenbaum, and Morris Rosen, walked into the Flamingo's casino. They calmly announced to the staff that they were now in charge and immediately started running the show under the direction of Lansky. This perfectly coordinated transition, executed almost simultaneously with the slaying hundreds of miles away, strongly indicates a pre-planned action. Under this theory, Lansky had advocated for his friend at the Havana conference and promised that Bugsy would make good on his promises. Lansky in turn is speculated to have been told that if his friend didn't make good, he would have to do the deed himself. While the mob hit remains the historical consensus, Siegel's slaying is still officially an unsolved case, and several compelling alternative theories have emerged over the decades. Another plausible scenario points to a more personal motive: revenge. Siegel's relationship with his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, was famously passionate, but also incredibly volatile, to the point where it was an open secret that he was roughing her up. This has led to the theory that one of Hill's brothers eliminated Siegel in retaliation. An employee who worked at the Flamingo claimed that he personally overheard one of Hill's brothers, a U.S. Marine, threaten to shoot Siegel after seeing bruises on his sister. Notably, Hill's behavior itself was quite suspicious, and she took a completely unplanned flight to Europe just days prior to the attack. Some think that she had been skimming money from the mob herself, and that she helped set up Bugsy in return for the mob looking the other way from her transgressions. Others speculate that she knew what her brother was going to do, and that she had a discussion with Lansky about it. In this scenario, Lansky gave the okay for her brother to attack Bugsy, but needed the details of the attack. This, in essence, secured her brother from retaliation going forward, and gave Lansky time to plan the takeover of the Flamingo. It also would have saved Lansky the trouble of directly taking out the man he came up in the organized crime world with. Despite the speculation and the compelling nature of these theories, the slaying of Bugsy Siegel remains one of America's most famous cold cases. No one was ever charged, and the Beverly Hills Police Department file still somehow officially remains open today, even though the perpetrator is surely deceased. Perhaps the ultimate irony of Siegel's life is that his greatest failure became his most enduring legacy. The Flamingo, which he reopened in March 1947, had just begun to show a profit by May, but if he was eliminated for that reason, it was too little too late to save him. After his passing, under the shrewd management of Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, with Lansky acting as overseer, the resort became an immediate and massive success. It reportedly earned a very handsome profit of $4 million in its first year of operation, and the cost overruns were completely covered. This success proved the viability of Bugsy's vision and kicked off the golden age of mob-controlled casinos in Las Vegas.